Morning, everybody. How are we doing today? So, in my friend Ken McAuliffe's Facebook Jazz Vinyl Lovers group, there was again quite a row this week over something that is a little bit ridiculous to me. A question was thrown out: is Blue Note the most important label? And I think a lot of people get confused between what's most important and valued in the grand scheme of things versus what I personally like best. And those two things aren't the same. And I might be a bit of a jerk for saying this, but most people aren't even qualified to comment on comparing labels. It's not something you really have enough information about when you only have a couple dozen, a half dozen records from a label. You might love those 6 records you have from said label, but unless you know the body of work of that label, how can you really comment on how great a label it was and how consistent they were and what kind of product they put out? And some of the comments I found just asinine, for lack of a better term. And I don't mean to call nobody out. I'm not going to put no names in this, but someone suggested that Atlantic made better record covers than Blue Note, and that Blue Note's covers were sort of used, not repetitious, but just the Blue Note covers are timeless. They're the best album covers ever. The consistency of the artwork is insane. There's a lot of really crappy Atlantic album covers. There's a couple cool ones. I love that Bill Russo record, but man, there's some really shitty Atlantic design work, graphics work, the fonts, a lot of it just feels very, it's nowhere near the level of Blue Note art-wise. And I think what happens is a lot of these people who think they're jazz fans, or are jazz fans, but they're still kind of level 1, level 2, just getting into the whole thing, they're trying to sound deeper and more knowledgeable than they are by saying, oh, Blue Note's not the best. I love ECM, I love Impulse, I love Strata, I love whatever, MPS, Prestige, Atlantic, a lot of things were thrown out there. Candid. And I just gotta say, it's crazy. And don't take my word for it. Go to the Penguin Jazz album review books and look up Blue Notes. And I think it's out of 4 stars, if I recall. Just about the entire body of work is 3.5, 4 stars. Almost the entire, I think the entire body of work from 55 through 67 has been reprinted endlessly. The demand is such that these have always been in print. And that's got nothing to do with Tone Poet. That's got nothing to do with today's pressings, and this is a recent thing. Blue Note's been in print forever. And has there been eras where there was less available? Sure. During the 90s, early 2000s, all you had was that Scorpio stuff, which isn't nearly as bad as people make it out to be. My gosh, people are like, oh, it's the worst shit. It's come on. It put Blue Note music out there for $9. That's a great thing. Again, some of the audiophiles, I just find them so pretentious and ridiculous. And there's audiophiles I know, respect, and love, who love the music as much as I love their speakers. But some of the things these people say, I'm just like, some of the labels they were suggesting were better than Blue Note. It got my dander up a little bit. And I'm the first one to say, yeah, there's a lot of great labels besides Blue Note. If anybody's out there saying, man, buy this label, check out Argo, check out Bethlehem, check out Savoy's great body of work. I'm always the one promoting all the great jazz labels from the 50s and 60s anyway. And the Blue Note canon isn't just by chance and happenstance to be the one that's stood the test of time. It's not just the artwork. It's not just the collectible it's a whole bunch of things, and a lot of them are very tangible. And the one thing that's most important, and I've talked about it numerous times, but if you're new to the channel, it's the unwatered down Blackness. If you're following Blue Note chronologically, after 55, they don't record white cats. Not as leaders. There's a few cats that get in their assignment from time to time. Pepper Adams being one that's As my friend Tony always says, he's pretty much a brother anyway from Detroit. But this was a very black thing. And it was run by a couple of little Jewish guys, Alfred and Frank, and they weren't necessarily being racist about it. There was just something about these young black cats were saying that was so powerful. And that unwatered down nature of it is why it got documented and recorded regardless of profit margins, regardless of budgets, regardless of how much money a said record was making them. The integrity of the art was what mattered and always came first. And that integrity is what makes it stand the test of time. There's never no watered down, we're going to try to make a hit here, try to make a Christmas record, try to make the greatest hits of Broadway. Let's do Oklahoma, Kenny Drew. That was never the thing. There's no greatest hits. There's no Christmas records. There's no best of Kenny Burrell on Blue Note. The Blue Note canon is just release after release after release of new, fresh music over and over and over again. That's the stuff that got shelved is better than a lot of the other labels' releases. The consistency of that body of work is insane. It doesn't represent all of the history of jazz by any means. It's a small window, really, from 55 to 67. Blue Note's impact is prevalent. And it's really from 56, 57, 58, 59, where they're the cutting edge in jazz. And by 60, 61, 62, they start taking a backseat to other more innovative sounds. But they still manage to stay in tune and in step with Alfred's touch, still saying, we got to keep this stuff swinging. We got to keep it funky. We got to keep it danceable. You know, if you're not tapping your feet to it, I'm not sure we should be doing it. You know, so Alfred always had the design to what he was doing, which is important. But the notion that there's all these labels that made them more consistent. If you have 6 Impulse, 4 of them are Coltrane, 1 of them's a Yusuf Lateef, and 1 of them's a Pharoah Sanders, it's okay to say Impulse is my favorite label. But for you to say Impulse is the greatest label of all time when you have 6 titles, there's a lot of Beverly Jenkins and Gordon Jenkins kind of records. Collegiate high school bands on Impulse. There's some clunkers, there's some... Impulse doesn't have a sound per se. It was from Pee Wee Russell to Pharoah Sanders. It has this incredible broad spectrum. And few people are going to love all of that body of work. And to be quite honest, that's true for almost every label. Atlantic doesn't have a defined jazz sound. One of the comments was Atlantic wasn't really a jazz label. And that's not true. The 1200 series is incredibly jazz oriented. And there was a lot of incredible titles in there, including some of the most innovative jazz of the day. Giant Steps was on that label. Pithecanthropus erectus was on that label. So they weren't afraid of tackling some challenging music at Atlantic. But there's also a lot of kind of blues, R&B, very little else is cutting edge. Most of it's just more rhythm and blues side, especially as we get into the 60s with the 1200 series of Atlantic. I love Bethlehem. I think it's one of the coolest labels ever. It's kind of the undercover deep label. If you know Bethlehem, you're kind of a deeper level fan. But I'm not going to suggest it's the greatest label of all time. And part of what made me drawn to Blue Note way before this craze happened was when I read my Penguin Jazz books and the reviews of different albums and artists I didn't even know. Even the titles I didn't know were getting 4 stars out of 4. 3.5 stars out of 4. And the entire Blue Note canon is in these books being reviewed. And now if you try to do that for Argo, half their titles won't even be in there. They're still great records, but they didn't sell, they don't have the staying power, they didn't get the reviews, the ratings, so people don't know about a lot of that great stuff on Argo. There's no other label that has such a comprehensive body of work that stayed in print, that's all highly regarded, that has the greatest reviews by the unknown artists even. Even the most rare Blue Note titles are sought after. And most every label I can think of that put out a couple hundred records has dozens of titles that most people don't know about. Dozens. Prestige, Riverside. I can pull out 24 records from both those labels most of y'all never see. And you can be perusing Facebook jazz groups for 2 years and not see some of those records. But with Blue Note, every Blue Note record in the canon from that golden era before the sale It's posted endlessly. And has the Tone Poet thing put an overemphasis on Blue Note in terms of what people post and what people think the body of jazz looks like? Yeah. It has created this place where too many people think Blue Note was it, along with Impulse and Columbia. You know, by no means is that the case. And the Riverside 200, 300 sequence is equal to the Blue Note almost. Almost. It's not quite at that same level. This is a great record by Bill Jennings. A record I can't find the original of it on the King label. I think it was initially some of this was 10-inch stuff from the early 50s. Then it gets a LP reissue in 55, early in the 500 sequence at King. And then it gets reissued on the audio lab King side pressing with this cover. I don't like this cover as much, but I can't find the original, so I sprung for it. I'm a big Bill Jennings guy. His work with Leo Parker, his work at Prestige with some of the organ players. Bill Jennings is a real giant of jazz rhythm guitar, and he doesn't get much publicity. However, I digress. I'm going to leave it alone. But people, Blue Note isn't just about the publicity of Tone Poets. It's not just about the demand because of the internet. The staying power has nothing to do with those issues. And even the collectability, even the prices they fetch, there's a social economic value to these records that's lost on so many people. There was a militancy, there was a social urgency, there was a raise your fists and resist the tyranny that makes any art valuable. Any time in history, a people who are occupied and in trouble and in danger and hopeless and desperate create a mythology around a great art form that helps lead them to the promised land. That art form becomes invaluable. Even if as an Egyptian you don't recognize the power of what Moses is saying, you can still recognize there's something beautiful about it. You may not recognize that as an Egyptian, we've brought great tyranny on these people. You just thought of them as migrant slave workers who we brought civilization to. They used to live in the desert. And I think in America, we don't often really represent or recognize the difficulties of living in America as a black person, not just during slavery, not just during Reconstruction, but in through civil rights and even to the present today. It's not an easy walk. It's a stressful life filled with obstacles. You know, you can get killed for next to nothing as a black man in America, and we don't need to dive into that right now. But it's that social economic message that Blue Note consecrates on so many of those records of the late 50s. That's what made them cutting edge. That's what made hard bop what it was. There was a potency to it and an urgency to it that especially other black musicians around the country could feel. Like, oh man, those guys are going hard. When they put their horns to their lips, they saying Blakey's driving change. The same things that Armstrong and Ellington did a decade or two before. Blue Note's now at the cutting edge of that sound, saying we're the new young lions, and this is how we sound. The shining shoes and dancing for massa that 2 generations ago were doing, we ain't doing that. We're not even gonna placate you with a smile and a handshake and be polite about it. We're coming in and we're gonna make a heck of a lot of noise. And we're gonna stir some shit up. And even if we don't recognize that tangible magnetic force of resistance and the power of the music to create freedom and joy and to empower people so they can find a place of solace. And when I go there, that intersection between me and the Creator is so strong that I need to go there daily. And in constantly going there daily to save myself, I become a master. And I've compared it to the African mask many times. The African mask carver never set out to become the best carver. He never set out to be, I want to sell these masks on the beach and be it was never that. It was never like, I want people to say for miles around he's the best mask carver. He wanted to be the best protector of his village. To keep the evil spirits and the warring tribes away. I ain't witch doctoring for fun. I'm not doing this just to play games. We got spirits to ward off. We got evil at our doorstep. And so I need to protect my village the best I can by making this mask as scary and as intense as possible to keep evil at bay. And when you hear Lee Morgan, when you hear John Coltrane, when you hear Thelonious Monk, when you hear that whole generation of guys, there's a militancy and urgency that's putting that mask on us, protecting them, and it's giving them power. And all the stuff that imitates that is the stuff that you can still buy for $5-6 online. All that white jazz, which a lot of it's fantastic. Hardly any of it's collectible. Hardly any of it has value. In spite of how good it is, in spite of how great an imitation that was. And sometimes they're better carvers. Some of these white guys could play their asses off. They could really make it sound like real black music. But they don't have that need to protect the village, so there's something intangible about it. And it's the white cats sold 5 times as many records. And aside from Chet Baker, Bill Evans, and a few other cats, Art Pepper, most of that white jazz, even from greats like Stan Getz and Jerry Mulligan, are pretty cost efficient and affordable compared to even the obscure black artists. Try buying Walter Davis Cup on Blue Note and say how much that's going to cost you. Try comparing the hardest driving West Coast white cats, and they're so hard driving up tempo, but it's not hard bop. There's an intensity, there's an edge that a Blakey Jazz Messenger record is filled with that will sear the flesh from your bones. The intensity of these young men, the war cry, it's so desperate. And it's not just on my behalf, it's on my children's behalf, my wife's behalf, my parents' behalf. It's on those who have come before me and sacrificed their lives' behalf. It's on those who have yet to sacrifice their lives' behalves. This music is serious. And Blue Note captures that with such a precise, repetitive documentation. And so while most of us don't have the historical context to go, oh, this music's important because of that, I'm telling you right now, that's why it is what it is. It's why Blue Note records go for what they do. And Chuck D's records are going to go for that 30 years from now. The message of I will not succumb to your tyranny anymore is a message that will always have an audience. And even through a coded language like jazz, where the emotion is coming through improvisation, it's directly linked. Pickup trucks in this town, that's what they do. They think they're going to a monster truck. It just gets smaller every time I hear it, you know. It's so sincere, it's so desperate, it's so directly linked to my emotional place. And remember, jazz is based on improvisation, and improvisation is linked to our emotional place. What's a more direct way to express my emotion than via improvising? That's some fresh produce that's coming directly from the vine. It ain't going through a bunch of filters. It ain't going through White Guy Songbook. It ain't going through a Christmas song. It's not being diluted by you know, how I'm supposed to dress or how I'm supposed to look or how I'm supposed to speak to you. There's no filter between Lee Morgan, Donald Byrd, Kenny Drew, Art Blakey, Wayne Shorter. When those guys speak into that vehicle, it's the most honest sensation you'll find. And so we can talk Reed Miles and their great artwork. We can talk Frank Wolf and his great photography. We can talk Alfred and his great overview and design of the label. But what Alfred knew was what these young black men are saying is important. Because I've seen things like this in Germany and the resistance to tyranny and how it works and how magical that voice is. And here's this coded art form that's in the face of the oppressor saying, motherfuck you, and y'all ain't even bright enough to hear me say it. What a cool art form that is. So the notion that there's a greater jazz label than Blue Note, again, all that pre-war stuff is a whole different world of 78s and different labels and formats, and it's a whole different ball game. So you can't even really compare the 78 era to the LP era. It's a very different beast. And there's a ton of great important recordings made pre-war. And I'm never going to suggest that there's not infinitely great jazz on a lot of other great labels, but just not with the consistency throughout their body of work. There's no other label that did 400 records in a row that all kick ass. None. Emerson made some incredible records with Clifford Brown and Max Roach, Sonny Rollins, Harold Land. That quintet was one of the most fierce early bop proteges. These guys kind of defined it. And that's surrounded by Sarah Vaughan and strange piano boogie records. And boy, don't get me wrong, the early Emerson are outstanding. But in the first 100 Emerson, you're getting a lot of vault material from the 78 10-inch era. So there's not a lot of new material coming out on top of that. So a lot of what you feel is from 55, 56 as a release isn't from that era. So it doesn't have the same power as what was happening at Blue Note, where by 55 they were done issuing back catalog. They were moved on to just putting out new material. So every record just has that power, that same force, that same focus. And again, the rehearsal time of Blue Note's another factor. These guys were sitting there rehearsing for a couple of days before they tracked. And it's not just the rehearsing the track that makes them precise. It's the dialogue we have in between takes. It's the cigarette breaks and lunch breaks and going to dinner together where we sit and talk about the times and race and social issues and my wife and my children and my parents and my heart disease and my drugs in the neighborhood and my creator. And I'm talking about all these things and my bandmates are talking back to them. Next thing you know, next time we do that take, there's a synchronicity between us that's spiritual. It's intellectual. It's powerful. There's a lot of sloppy prestige sessions you can't compare to the precision of a Blue Note tape. And so by all means, people collect all the great jazz labels. Do not shy away ever from an Argo, from an Emerson, from a Pacific, from a Contemporary, from Riverside, Prestige, Blue Note, Verve. There's so many great labels. Savoy, Bethlehem. Not to mention the infinite smaller labels that did a dozen to 40, 50 releases. A lot of great labels. Roos is an incredible label. But you can't compare Roos' body of work to that Blue Note body of work. And so I think a lot of these guys are trying to sound really self-important by saying, oh, I don't fall for the fads. I'm not just a Blue Note guy. I think Atlantic and Prestige, but I think all these labels are better. You can say you like it more, but you can't say it's better. You just can't. And you don't have to take my word for it. Look at any jazz review book again. And look at even the titles you don't know. How there's few Blue Notes that score 3. And even fewer that score 2.5. You got to get to like a Cebu Martinez Conga record or something for it to be a 2.5 stars. The body of work at Blue Note's 3.5, 4 stars contingently. And that's insane. I'll be right back. I was going to dive into the Great Jazz West label. And it's only 10 releases, 9 actually. One's a collection of 2 early 10 inches. So really only 9 releases. That pound for pound, inch for inch is one of the great jazz labels of all time. My buddy Scott Baldwin and we were talking about it recently. He posted to Jazz Vinyl Lovers about that. And I couldn't agree more. For the 9 releases they have, it's a pretty hard-hitting lineup of releases. So we'll cover that in our next episode. Y'all be safe. Please support the channel. If you have the time and the money, go to Patreon. Throw us a few bucks a month to help us with the coffee shop and getting things together. If you want to go to my merchandise store, there's all kinds of cool gear here from the Facebook groups, from various different Jazz Shepherd designs, including the coffee shop designs. So we appreciate your support any way we can get it. It's a risky enterprise opening up a jazz cafe lounge in a small town, you know, and so we're trying to minimize our risks some by having people help us out, and we only have so much risk to take. You know, we're not made of money by any means. We're a pretty hand-to-mouth family, and between the 4 cats, dog, and the 4 of us, it's pretty tough sledding. We're doing okay. We're getting through. The pandemic's over. I'm finally back to work, thank you, but every dollar helps. And like I said, we're trying to raise money right now for the neon sign. I think we have about $900 so far, and we need to kind of get we need to double that. So anybody who wants to help out, make us the neon sign for the coffee shop with the big record and the Jazz Shepherd logo. It's going to be a cool sign. Please subscribe to Patreon. You can hit me up and message me. We can go through PayPal. Lots of different ways we can go about it. And again, part of what we want to do is preserve this jazz museum. These complete discographies aren't just for me. I want people to be able to have access to them and to come in and to do research and to hear and to dig and to ask questions. And hopefully it becomes a point where we actually kind of become a museum of sorts, where you come here to learn about the jazz canon of the 50s and 60s and even the 40s, you know, and really explore what happened in America at that time. It's an important thing worth documenting. We'll talk to you all soon. Be safe. Blessings. Peace. Okay, here's the update now. The doors aren't on yet, but everything else is in, minus a few miscellaneous things down there I gotta sort through still, but for the most part, all these discographies are in there and sorted numerically by their chronological release numbers for all these great New York jazz labels. And once these have glass doors on it, they'll be secure, and no one can come into my coffee shop and steal a bunch of my records. There's seating, a couple of spots right here, nice little corner for lounging right back here. Here's the main DJ booth setup. Again, that wall there is going to be cut open into a coffee kitchen, so I had to move that whole shelf of records. So that's just going to be a blank wall for the time being. This is going to be my baked goods, I think we're going to put in there. That means my 10 inches all have to move, but I also realize that my 10 inches would be pretty vulnerable to being stolen since this doesn't lock. And so this is going to be all put into the shelves, my thinking is. Even though I do like having the 10 inches on display, I can't have my Bethlehem 10 inches walking out of here. So that's the front lounge update. And I'm going to walk you back now. Again, that's the Chicago, New York Jazz. Chicago, LA Jazz, sorry. There's the Coffee and Jazz logo. This is his bathroom. For the people in the coffee shop, they're going to be able to use this as a little bathroom space. Nothing. We don't have to change that, thankfully. We do have to wall this off from the apartment, which sucks. But here's the back lounge. It's really warm vibe in here. I call this the tropical room. The jungle room, we call it. My wife calls it the reggae room sometimes. It's got a real African tropical vibe. Again, that's the history of music is kind of sprouts from the blues up there into the rock, into the funk soul and the hip hop, into the jazz in the front room. Here's my 45 bin, which I pull fun tracks from for gigs. The other DJ set, that's electronic music and house music. So that's got everything from the Gorillas to Massive Attack to, the whole scene, Basement Jacks, whatever. Again, kind of tropical African mass. And then back here is all the hip hop and the soul. This area needs to have some mood lighting. It doesn't really have much right now, just that green light. And so it's been set up so that pulling records from my gigs has gotten very simple. And lastly, I want to show you this room in the dark. The atmosphere is really different in here in the dark. I need to put some lighting on that shelf yet. But the DJ booth. And then the hangout space. The cats are having a little fun. It's a cool night in early September, Minnesota, which means the weather's quite pleasant. probably low 70s right now. And Minnesota's beautiful in September. So that's how the room looks at night. And that's an update of how we're making progress. Now it's just waiting on the health board and some contractors to give me some final okays on some things. And we're looking at some other options on a few things, but I'm not gonna lie, I don't like the business side of this stuff. I like playing records and talking to music. I don't really like trying to... Entrepreneurial shit's not my game, man. It's not where I'm at. I'm here, I might as well do it. But man, the music's all that matters to me. And everyone around wants to kind of keep making me spend more money to make it this and that. It's like, man, it's not. I just want it to be simple, basic, but it is what it is. So working through it. I'll have more for you soon. Peace.